You snapped, you screamed, you hit back, you freaked out, and now you're being branded as the abuser. I hate the term reactive abuse. It is the wrong label, and I'm going to tell you what is much better to use. The internet calls this reactive abuse, but your trauma response, it's not abuse. I can't figure out why your survival needs some PR overhaul here, but here we are. Now, before we go any further, my name is Sonni. I'm an expert in toxic and abusive relationships. I specialize in trauma bonding and narcissistic abuse. Not all abusers are narcissistic. The label is not the point. And more so, the label of reactive abuse is definitely not the point. On my channel, I expose what abusive men do. So for more content like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. Now, I want to first really explain what the term reactive abuse means, because this is a wildly debated topic when there is an actual answer. Reactive abuse refers to the behavior of the person reacting and stating that it either looks like or is abuse because they're freaking out or screaming or name calling or even hitting. So it is the label for what the victim is doing. People often tell me, no, you're wrong. It's actually the label for what the perpetrator is doing. He is creating the reaction through abuse. And while I totally agree that that is a much better definition, it is just not the definition. Term reactive abuse was created to define what the victim is doing. And listen, at the end of the day, we're not going to call anything that a victim does to survive abuse. So if you've been using it to describe that the perpetrator is provoking a reaction, you've been using it wrong. That whole sort of he pushed you until you reacted, I get it. But that describes the tactic, not the label. This is where things get messy, because what's happening when we use this phrase, reactive abuse, is we are misconstruing the reaction, the normal, healthy reaction of someone who is being abused as the problem, which is really just leading right into what so many abusers do, is they actually frame it as their abuse, their behavior is not the problem, your reaction is the problem. And it can also look like mutual abuse, which is not a thing, but we'll get into that. So reactive abuse is actually a trauma response. Now, we talk a lot about the 4 trauma responses, but everybody seems to focus on fight or flight. But there's also freeze and fawn. The fight response is just a nervous system protection. Your body is going into fight mode as part of survival because you have been enduring emotional abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, you name it. So you put anybody in this sort of pressure cooker, and of course, at some point, they're going to explode. Our nervous systems are actually incredible things, right? This is when you are mobilizing for survival. Something is happening. There is a threat. And again, these threats are so interesting because we often look at this from the perspective of physical abuse, right? So if somebody's coming at you, we see it as self-defense. And I even hear people say that you shouldn't use the phrase reactive abuse because really it's self-defense. That really implies that you've had to do something physically to protect yourself. But sometimes that's not what's going on. There are women who are in abusive relationships that don't even know really that they're in an abusive relationship. And then they start yelling at and defending themselves and getting loud, getting angry, throwing objects, name calling. And there's lots of ways we can describe this. Sometimes you're mirroring their behavior. You're picking up what some people kind of call narcissistic fleas, which is obviously not a clinical term. But it's interesting all the ways that we can look at this. But I so rarely, if ever, hear someone describe this as just a very normal fight response. Many women don't even have to imagine being so unbelievably angry at the way that you're being treated that you have this really protective response, right? You get filled with this really protective energy. You want to defend yourself, get angry, yell, treat someone the way that they're treating you. And I'm not justifying the behavior, but it's normal to defend yourself. It is normal to want to stand up for yourself. When victims of abuse are in a relationship with someone where they're experiencing all of this harm, we go into a survival mode. So I mentioned these 4 trauma responses. And again, everybody talks about fight and flight. Most people kind of know what those are, but they don't always know how and when they show up. Fight, which is what we're really talking about, this is when you push and when you defend yourself, when you get so upset and you have an outward reaction. A flight response might be running away. It could be leaving. It could be shutting down. Just in some way you want to escape. So it could be escape the conversation. It could be escape the relationship, escape the situation, whatever. The freeze response could be a numbness, a going blank, literal paralysis of just standing there absolutely frozen in a situation where there's even a physical threat coming at you. Now, the fawn response is honestly, to me, one of the most interesting ones because this is the one that looks the most confusing from the outside. You're appeasing him, you're catering to him, you're managing his mood, trying to make sure that he's happy, but it's all for survival. It's so that nothing is harming you anymore. In a fawn response, often you even see the victim is blaming themselves for what's happening. But again, this is all survival. But the one that seems to be so misunderstood is the fight response. And this is where people might say, well, they're yelling at each other, they're both bad. There is no such thing as mutual abuse. People can be mutually toxic, but not mutually abusive. Because in an abusive dynamic, one person has the power and one person doesn't. And what's wild about this is that women specifically get so pathologized when they're reacting to something. Nobody's ever going, well, what's the context? I always find when this is reversed, when a man is a victim of abuse and a woman is a perpetrator of abuse, everybody wants context. Immediately, there's nuance, there's context. We need to know what happened, what was going on right before that, because men don't just randomly do that. But when women react to abuse, suddenly we need to know nothing, right? There's no excuse. There's absolutely nothing that could ever make this justified. They must either both be abusive or she's the problem. Women get pathologized for reacting to abuse. Now, what's really interesting is that the explosion, the reaction, that's usually very visible. And the truth is, a lot of perpetrators are standing there with cell phones, recording, making sure that they do it in front of other people, making sure that that part is very public. So they'll abuse you in private, but then they'll provoke you really softly in public so that you have a reaction. And they use really covert tactics. They'll use things like dog whistling, negging, anything that's just kind of covertly manipulative so that your explosion becomes public. And if for any reason it's not, they'll be sure to tell people that you yelled and they'll give no context for it because they're trying to frame you as the problem. Now, the explosion is often just the visible part of invisible abuse. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this gets used against women, and that is so common. And honestly, the best part that men use is DARVO, right? Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. That term was actually coined by Dr. Jennifer Freed, who I recently had on my podcast where we were talking about another term she coined called betrayal blindness. But DARVO is a really fascinating form of gaslighting. He will always point to your reaction as proof that you're the problem. And this is a really great way that they avoid accountability and shift the blame because they'll do something to provoke you and then immediately flip it and say, there's no issue. The only issue is that you're reacting. Why are you yelling? And they make it seem like you're crazy when you're having a very normal reaction to being abused. Obviously, they want to just completely ignore everything that led up to this moment. And again, you notice that benefit of the doubt really only goes one way. I think one of the most crazy-making parts, too, is that often you see abuse happening over years, certainly months, but years sometimes. And eventually, she snaps. And then that's the moment that he wants to hold on to and talk about. That's the moment that gets centered. No matter what, you can't move past that because that one time you yelled, you were a problem, we're both bad, we both need to change, but you go first, right? Even when you can remotely get an abusive man to take accountability, heavy on the air quotes there, it's not real accountability because they want you to change. We're both bad, so we both need to do work, but you are the one that has to go to therapy and read the books and change your behavior. You need to be a better communicator. You need to not yell no matter what he does to you. He's completely judging your reaction and he wants other people to judge your reaction, but he wants all of the context to not exist anymore. I can't help but notice pretty consistently that when a woman reacts explosively, context is just not important at all anymore. But there's tons of people in comment sections going on and on about how men who are videotaped doing something absolutely horrible, we got to know what the context is, right? Maybe she cheated. Maybe she deserved it. So many abusive men really believe that they're just dishing out what they think is justified, right? You did something wrong and they're just punishing you. What else would happen? It's normal, right? But there's a really big piece here that we're not going to just skirt over. When you have a reaction to something, that isn't a pattern. That is a reaction. Trying to survive a situation like this when you're in an abusive relationship, and we're not making survival decisions, right? Our nervous system steps in to protect us and keep us safe, which is literally its job. We're not thinking through, I think I'll use the fight response now, or you know what, I think I'll fawn. That's just not how our nervous systems work. Our bodies just go into action. That's why sometimes we just absolutely lose it. When you're trying to survive, you're not trying to control someone, which is what an abuser is doing. These big explosive reactions that a perpetrator of abuse has, that is meant to control you. Your explosive reaction to being abused is not you trying to control another person. I mean, you could argue you're trying to regain control over yourself, but you're not trying to control him. A fight response is actually a very accurate response. Abuse, to actually be considered abusive, you need repetition, you need a pattern, you need entitlement. You're going to see power and control when you're really looking for it. And I know the guilt that so many women feel for reacting, and like, hello, I can absolutely relate. I once threw a chair across a room. I once threw water in his face. I've smashed glasses before. And at the time, I felt awful. Now, truth be told, I never thought I was abusive, but I did feel guilty about that behavior because that's not characteristic of me. That's not how I behave. I've never done anything like that in any other relationship. I know abusers always say that, right? But you know you. I'm asking you to find that inner self-trust and know this is not who you are. This is not how you generally show up in relationships. If you feel like you've been pushed to that point and you have no history of this, and you are experiencing something in this relationship that feels like you are being abused, ask yourself why that is. If this isn't a pattern for you, this is just a response. And on that note, I've even heard people refer to this as a reactive response, which is a much better label than reactive abuse. But the truth is, it's a fight response. So ask yourself if this was a sustained pattern of power and control on your part. Are you trying to control your partner, or are you trying to stay safe? Are you trying to just defend yourself? Look at the frequency, look at your own intent, and I bet you any money that you will really start to see that you're not the problem. Now, letting go of this guilt is very difficult, but I want you to really understand that this is false guilt. Guilt means that you did something wrong and you have feelings about that. That makes sense. And I understand having some level of guilt because we all think, I need to be able to control myself. But what I'm saying is that in these moments, we don't feel like we have control. And that is a nervous system response. It's not a choice that you made. So it's not to say that people who engage in this type of response are just not responsible for their behavior at all. Everybody is accountable. However, you can recognize that you were pushed to that point and still take accountability for your behavior without just blaming yourself or thinking that you're some awful person, or worse, that you're an abuser, or the myth that you're in a mutually abusive relationship. Your nervous system did what it was built to do. So if you need help getting past this, if you need help understanding this, you can work with me one-on-one, or I'll invite you to join my group coaching program called Rise and Rebuild, where we focus on rebuilding your identity, your self-worth, knowing yourself, and loving yourself over 12 weeks with just 8 to 10 women live online. So I would love to invite you to join Rise and Rebuild. It's co-hosted with myself and Dr. Peter Salerno. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this, and I'll catch you in the next video.